When was the last occasion you engaged in an activity solely for your own pleasure, not for your children or grandchildren? If this question caused you to hesitate, you are not alone. Numerous parents, particularly mothers and grandmothers, dedicate decades to prioritizing others, preparing meals, providing childcare, and managing expenses for adult children, without complaint, embodying silent sacrifice. However, the reality often overlooked is that you need not vanish to demonstrate your affection. After the age of 60, your time is equally valuable, yet many older adults succumb to the misconception that their needs are secondary. Their value is solely contingent upon their utility to others. Gradually, they relinquish hobbies, friendships, health checkups, and even rest. Eventually, they gaze into the mirror and scarcely recognize the reflection. After dedicating a lifetime to loving others, one must ask, who is loving you? This is not a matter of guilt, but rather of granting oneself permission to matter, to rest, and to assert, I have done enough, and now it is my time as well. Taking care of oneself is not an act of selfishness. It is a necessity for survival. If you have ever felt as though you have diminished parts of yourself while selflessly caring for your children, this video is intended for you. Today, we will candidly discuss why it is not only acceptable but essential to cease sacrificing everything after the age of 60, and how doing so can restore greater love, peace, and balance to your life and family. You will discover 7 compelling reasons why excessive giving of your time, money, energy, or health can subtly undermine both your well-being and I will demonstrate how establishing boundaries, prioritizing oneself, and rediscovering joy can result in a fulfilling life, even after a prolonged period of neglecting personal needs. This approach does not assign blame to our children. Rather, it aims to transform the narrative from silent sacrifice to healthy, joyful aging. So, prepare a cup of tea, settle in, and let us navigate this journey together. If this message resonates with you, consider subscribing and activating the notification bell as I share heartfelt insights. Weekly guidance is essential, as aging should not equate to invisibility. Let us commence with the initial rationale for ceasing excessive self-sacrifice. Post 60. Your offspring require your wisdom, not your suffering. Throughout the course of parenthood, numerous older adults erroneously conclude that greater self-denial equates to increased affection. In reality, what your children derive the most benefit from is not your fatigue, but rather your exemplary conduct. Your quality of life is determined by your self-care and personal development as you age. Consider Linda, a 69-year-old mother of 3 from Ohio. Throughout her adult life, she has been the caretaker for those around her, working full-time, preparing holiday meals, assisting in the upbringing of her grandchildren, and providing financial support to her children during difficult times. She perceived this as her maternal duty, to be perpetually available and to acquiesce to their needs. However, over time, Linda started to feel overlooked, and her joints ached from years of self-neglect. Her youngest son seldom contacted her unless he required assistance, while her daughter had come to anticipate Linda's support with the children without inquiring about her well-being. One evening, Linda sat alone in her kitchen, gazing at a cold cup of tea, and recognized that she had not engaged in a discussion about her own aspirations or needs in over a decade. Researchers in family psychology frequently note this phenomenon among aging parents, termed role entrenchment, which suggests that certain parents, particularly mothers, become profoundly enmeshed in their caregiving roles. Individuals may become so entrenched in their parental roles that they neglect their own identities. As parents continuously give without adequate replenishment, they gradually diminish their presence in their own lives, exchanging joy for obligation, hobbies for chores, and health for convenience. Although their intentions stem from love, the outcome can manifest as emotional fatigue, resentment, or even depression. Consequently, children may perceive this pattern as normative, inadvertently perpetuating it or depending on it in detrimental ways. The remedy lies not in ceasing to care, but in altering the manner of care provided. Linda resolved to initiate a transformation. She convened with her children to articulate her sentiments, not as grievances, but as contemplations. She expressed her longing for painting, her desire to attend church regularly, and her need to prioritize her health. Her children were taken aback, yet supportive, recognizing that they had undervalued her presence. They urged her to pursue personal interests. Consequently, Linda now paints every Wednesday, participates in a walking group on weekends, and has even enrolled for a trip to the Grand Canyon. For years, she harbored a quiet aspiration. Your children do not require you to forfeit your life as a testament to your love. Rather, they need to witness the embodiment of healthy, vibrant aging. They seek your wisdom, laughter, and narratives, not your silence or self-neglect. By prioritizing your well-being, you grant them the license to pursue the same when their time arrives. Now, let us examine the consequences of excessive sacrifice over prolonged periods, which can engender concealed resentment that insidiously undermines even the most intimate relationships. The primary rationale for ceasing such sacrifices is evident. Everything beyond the age of 60 stems from the notion that incessantly giving without limits can subtly foster resentment on both sides. What initially begins as love can, over time, transform into an imperceptible burden between oneself and one's children, gradually undermining the connection one diligently strives to cultivate. Margaret, a 68-year-old retired nurse from Indiana, dedicated years to babysitting her grandchildren 5 days a week. Initially, she relished every moment, snacks in the park, afternoon naps with the little ones, and the sensation of being needed. However, as time progressed, her knees began to ache, and she ceased her caregiving activities. Margaret declined a trip with her church friends to attend her book club, as her daughter expressed, "Mom, I really need you this weekend." Although Margaret acquiesced with a smile, an undercurrent of sadness emerged, as she felt her life was increasingly dictated by others. Conversely, her daughter began to presume that Margaret would always acquiesce. When Margaret eventually declined an invitation one weekend, the tension escalated, prompting her daughter to inquire, "Why now?" unaware of the extent of Margaret's sacrifices. Psychologists have a term for this dynamic. The emotional overfunctioning pattern occurs when one individual in a relationship assumes excessive responsibilities, often to maintain harmony. However, this can inadvertently hinder the other person's growth or foster dependency. In parent-child dynamics, this can be particularly detrimental as older parents who continually provide may believe it strengthens their bond. Over time, this can result in exhaustion, burnout, and feelings of being undervalued. For the children, it may engender guilt, confusion, or other emotional complexities. Resentment arises when individuals perceive the unarticulated emotional burdens borne by their parents. The remedy is not to cease assistance entirely, but rather to provide support from a position of strength rather than sacrifice. Margaret ultimately discovered a method to re-establish equilibrium. She engaged in a candid yet assertive conversation with her daughter, articulating her need for 2 days a week dedicated solely to herself. She commenced walking with a neighbor every Tuesday morning and rejoined her book club on Fridays. Surprisingly, her daughter did not resist this change. She acknowledged it, and as a result, their relationship flourished. Establishing boundaries can alleviate tension and foster warmth. Margaret did not sever the connection. Rather, she fortified it. If you have ever experienced fatigue yet hesitated to decline requests, or silently hoped others would recognize your needs without prompting, this message is pertinent to you. Your existence is not solely for the benefit of others. Your time, energy, and spirit are precious and warrant the opportunity to flourish. Now, let us examine the second rationale for why prioritizing others above oneself may adversely affect your long-term health more than it benefits your family, along with the third reason to cease self-sacrifice after the age of 60. Your children will lead their lives independently of your continuous involvement, and you are entitled to pursue your own aspirations. Many older adults silently defer their own dreams, interests, and adventures, mistakenly believing their primary responsibility is to support their children. However, what occurs when the children no longer require or desire that support? What remains for you? Consider Ella Lehner, a 74-year-old widow from Pennsylvania, who dedicated decades to raising 3 children and assisting them through college. As she drew nearer to her youngest son, who had begun a family, she envisioned cherishing moments with her grandchildren, partaking in Sunday dinners, and remaining actively engaged. However, life unfolded differently. Her son was preoccupied with advancing his career, the grandchildren were involved in numerous activities, and weekends frequently passed without communication. Ella Laner did not hold them accountable. They were occupied, much like she once was. Yet, beneath the surface, she felt overlooked. Her days were spent in a monotonous routine of tending to plants, watching television, and awaiting someone to seek her assistance until a friend invited her to a community painting class. "I haven't picked up a brush in 40 years, she remarked, laughing nervously. Nevertheless, she attended and subsequently returned. Gradually, her week became infused with color, laughter, and a sense of purpose she had not experienced in years. Many older adults perceive their worth solely in terms of their utility to others, an identity molded by years of parenting, caregiving, and addressing others' issues. However, at a certain juncture, this mindset transforms into a confinement. The reality is that your children desire your happiness. They wish for you to thrive. To witness your smile once more, rather than merely appearing for favors, is essential. Even if unspoken, your happiness grants others the liberty to embrace greater freedom. Psychologists refer to this phenomenon as the empty nest identity crisis, which is more prevalent than commonly acknowledged. When we fail to substitute outdated roles with new purposes, we risk emotional decline. However, revitalizing one's life does not necessitate drastic alterations. It can commence with modest initiatives such as enrolling in a class, exploring unfamiliar destinations, or mastering a cherished recipe that has remained unattempted. These pursuits are not mere indulgences. They are vital steps towards renewal. Investments in mental health, vitality, and legacy are evident as Eleanor now conducts a monthly painting class. Her children, observing the enthusiasm in her voice, communicate more frequently, with one stating, "Mom, I love seeing you so happy." Recently, her daughter remarked, that singular comment reminded Eleanor that existence transcends mere availability. Moreover, this leads us to the next truth frequently disregarded. Total self-sacrifice is not love, it is self-erasure. Let us examine how excessive giving can obliterate one's identity. The fourth reason to refrain from sacrificing everything after the age of 60 is that self-neglect is not merely detrimental to health. It gradually diminishes one's essence. Many older adults remain unaware of how frequently they subordinate their needs, desires, and even their identities in the name of love. However, genuine love does not necessitate vanishing. It demands the presence of one's complete, authentic self. Let us discuss Carol, a 66-year-old grandmother from Michigan. For years, Carol was the linchpin of her family. She prepared holiday meals, assisted her daughter through 2 challenging divorces, and cared for her grandchildren almost every weekend. Everyone referred to her as Super Grandma. However, beneath her cheerful facade was a woman who had not experienced a moment of solitude in over a year. She had not visited her hairstylist in months, her neglected piano remained untouched, and her back pain had intensified, yet she continually asserted, "I will have it examined next month." She held firm in her beliefs. Real mothers do not express grievances, and prioritizing oneself is perceived as selfish. However, she failed to recognize that she was gradually diminishing both emotionally and physically. Experts in geriatric psychology refer to this phenomenon as caregiver identity loss, wherein an individual defines their existence exclusively through the care of others, leading to a disconnection from their own desires, aspirations, and even well-being. Consequently, it becomes increasingly challenging to respond to fundamental inquiries such as, what do you enjoy? What do you require? The prolonged duration of this situation results in increased disconnection and invisibility. Your body continuously conveys messages, particularly as you age, through sensations such as aches, fatigue, and mood fluctuations. These signals are not mere background noise. They are significant communications. However, if you are perpetually preoccupied with the needs of others, these signals may be disregarded. Over time, this neglect can result in burnout, depression, or severe health complications that could have been averted. Carol's pivotal moment occurred when she missed her granddaughter's dance recital due to a sudden migraine that incapacitated her for 2 days, prompting her daughter to inquire for the first time, "Mom, are you well? You never take a break." This initiated a new dialogue, prompting Carol to establish gentle boundaries. One weekend off per month, no last-minute errands unless in emergencies. She resumed playing the piano, began weekly walks in the park, and started attending senior yoga classes. Gradually, she revitalized her spirit. One is never meant to diminish oneself to accommodate another's life. Love should not necessitate silence, fatigue, or invisibility. You are significant not only to others, but also to yourself. Now let us discuss a truth that many individuals grapple with the difficulty of declining requests. In the subsequent section, we will examine why mastering the art of saying no without remorse constitutes one of the most beneficial choices one can make after the age of 60. The fifth rationale for ceasing self-sacrifice post 60 is the recognition that one is entitled to refuse and should not experience guilt for doing so. Numerous seniors bear the unseen weight of perpetual acquiescence, believing it to be their obligation or that refusal equates to disappointing others. However, the reality is that boundaries are not barriers. Rather, they serve as conduits to healthier relationships. Tom, a 72-year-old retired electrician from Oregon, dedicated years to assisting his adult son with various tasks, ranging from home repairs to unforeseen car expenses. Initially, he was content to provide this support, often stating, "That's what dads do." However, as the requests became increasingly frequent and costly, Tom expressed concern about his savings, only for his son to dismiss it with, "You always find a way, Dad." Tom recognized that his actions had shifted from assistance to enabling, and he was reluctant to refuse due to a fear of appearing cold or unfeeling. The guilt associated with declining requests is profoundly ingrained in our conditioning. Parents, particularly from previous generations, were taught to give selflessly, prioritize others, and equate love with sacrifice. However, psychologists now comprehend that unconditional support does not equate to limitless support. Generosity can devolve into obligation, and over time, obligation fosters resentment. Healthy relationships flourish on mutual respect rather than unilateral giving. By consistently acquiescing, you condition others to anticipate your compliance. Conversely, when you begin to assertively and kindly decline, you are not dismantling the relationship. Rather, you are transforming it into a more equitable and transparent dynamic. This also exemplifies a significant principle, self-respect. Tom ultimately engaged in a candid conversation with his son, stating, "I love you, but I must prioritize my own well-being. I can no longer assist with substantial expenses." This exchange was undoubtedly uncomfortable. However, it resulted in a breakthrough. His son, who had never considered his father's financial constraints, expressed remorse. He accepted a supplementary job and commenced managing his finances with greater prudence. For the first time in years, Tom experienced a sense of liberation. He no longer dreaded phone calls, ceased his daily scrutiny of his bank account, and found tranquility. Declining requests does not signify selfishness. Rather, it demonstrates strength. It is a means of honoring one's own time, energy, and limitations. Surprisingly, those who care for you will adapt and, in fact, will hold you in higher regard for asserting your boundaries. Be forthright regarding your needs. If you have refrained from establishing boundaries due to guilt, remember that love and limits can coexist. Declining what depletes you creates space to embrace what enriches you. Now, let us transition to a more pragmatic rationale for ceasing overgiving, your financial independence. In the subsequent section, we will examine how excessive giving can subtly jeopardize your long-term security and the measures you can take to safeguard it. The sixth reason to cease sacrificing everything after 60 is that financial independence is paramount. The issue transcends mere financial considerations. It pertains to the preservation of one's dignity. Numerous older adults experience a sense of obligation to provide financial assistance to their children, even when such actions jeopardize their own stability. While offering support out of love is instinctive, doing so at the expense of personal security can result in significant stress, regret, and a diminished sense of control in later life. Consider Harold, a 71-year-old widower from Georgia. Following his retirement from a lengthy career in construction, he anticipated a period of tranquility, engaging in gardening, traveling, and possibly restoring his vintage possessions. Harold, a fishing boat operator, faced unforeseen circumstances as his daughter lost her employment, his grandson required assistance with college expenses, and his youngest son grappled with financial debt. One by one, he intervened by settling bills, co-signing loans, and addressing emergencies. He depleted his savings, exhausted his emergency fund, and ultimately refinanced his home, repeatedly assuring himself they will regain their stability soon. However, they did not respond as swiftly as he anticipated. In the interim, Harold began to forego dental appointments, preoccupied with utility expenses, and lay awake at night contemplating the sustainability of his situation. Research from the National Council on Aging indicates that nearly 30% of adults over 60 who provide continuous financial assistance to their adult children experience heightened anxiety and diminished quality of life. Experts refer to this phenomenon as financial caregiving burnout, a concealed burden that undermines both confidence and well-being. Furthermore, when one gives beyond their financial capacity, it is not merely by jeopardizing your own comfort. You diminish your capacity to manage emergencies, medical concerns, or escalating living expenses. When an older adult becomes financially reliant on others, particularly those they previously supported, it can result in embarrassment, shame, and strained relationships. However, there exists a method to assist your loved ones without compromising your future, which begins with candid discussions. Harold ultimately convened with his children and stated, "I wish to help, but I cannot continue in this manner." He subsequently engaged a financial advisor. He assessed his expenditures and established strict boundaries. Initially, this caused friction. His son even labeled him as unfeeling. However, several months later, a transformation occurred. His daughter secured a part-time position, his grandson sought grants, and his son enrolled in a debt management program. Without Harold as a financial fallback, they discovered their own resilience, allowing Harold to experience a renewed sense of freedom. Dignity in later life is contingent upon decisions made in the present, particularly regarding finances. You possess every right to safeguard your earnings, prioritize your needs, and relish the rewards of your labor. The life you diligently constructed to support your family does not necessitate the forfeiture of your foundation. When you safeguard your foundation, a remarkable transformation occurs. You acquire the energy and tranquility required to attend to your own well-being. In our concluding point, we will examine why cultivating your own joy, health, and autonomy is not an act of selfishness. Rather, it is the most profound gift you can offer your loved ones. The seventh rationale for ceasing to sacrifice everything after the age of 60 is arguably the most compelling. When you prioritize your own care, it benefits everyone. A millionaire discovered an unconscious girl in the park and transported her to his estate. Upon her awakening, everybody were astonished. "Miss Awaken, can you perceive my voice? Please do not return me to that place." Julian West's voice quivered with urgency as he crouched beside the inert woman lying on the damp grass. Her breath manifested in weak, diminishing wisps. Her complexion was pallid, and her hands were frigid. He instinctively unwound the scarf from his neck and delicately positioned it around her shoulders, subsequently removing his coat and meticulously draping it over her quivering form. Julian was not the type of individual who traversed urban parks after nightfall. However, this evening was distinct. Following an unanticipated site inspection at a secluded property he was contemplating for a new eco-resort, he resolved to alleviate the day's burdens by taking a stroll before returning to his penthouse. He constructed his empire from the foundation. West Global Hospitality, a brand emblematic of opulence and meticulousness. However, that evening, destiny led him to a location where his affluence held no significance. She had nearly vanished into the shadows, scarcely a silhouette at the path's periphery, akin to a dropped leaf. Instinct compelled him to halt. The tranquility of her physique did not convey a sense of repose. It resembled capitulation. "You will be all right," he murmured as he carefully cradled her in his arms. She was insubstantial, her head drooping against his shoulder, damp strands of hair adhering to her cheek. Her lips moved once more, scarcely audible. "Do not allow them to discover me." Julian's jaw tightened. He was unaware of their identity, yet the terror in her voice was unmistakable. Upon his arrival at the estate, The staff approached him with astonished expressions, but he dismissed them. He instructed them to prepare the guest room and to contact Dr. Mason, emphasizing the urgency and need for discretion. The mansion was tranquil, its customary serene atmosphere disturbed by the presence of an unfamiliar individual. Julian personally ascended the marble staircase with her and placed her on the guest bed. She whispered gently in her slumber, shifting slightly beneath the blanket he had wrapped around her. Dr. Mason arrived in 20 minutes. He assessed her with clinical accuracy, examining for fractures, cranial injuries, infections, and signs of shock. Julian stood at the threshold, arms crossed, gaze fixed on her delicate figure. She is fatigued, dehydrated, and bruised, but there are no life-threatening conditions, the doctor stated. She requires sustenance, warmth, and repose, potentially experiencing trauma, mild forgetfulness, or emotional shock. I advise maintaining her tranquility, ensuring hydration, and monitoring her condition for the subsequent 24 hours. Thank you. I will attend to her, Julian stated, then returned to her side when the doctor departed. The room was softly illuminated, creating gentle shadows on her serene visage. She appeared youthful, possibly in her mid-20s. There was an unmistakable delicacy about her, yet also an element of concealment. Her body exhibited subtle marks, faded bruises, and old scars, indicative of someone who had endured significantly more than a mere cold night. As Julian repositioned the blanket around her shoulders, something drew his attention. A faint outline just below her hairline at the nape of her neck. He leaned in closer. It was a small, understated, stylized tattoo. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the symbol as a variant, cleverly disguised yet unmistakable, of the logo employed by the Caldwell Travel Group, one of his most formidable industry competitors, a rival whose operations in developing nations had faced scrutiny for unethical labor practices, and who had repeatedly attempted to undermine Julian's projects through dubious tactics. What were the odds that a woman with this precise symbol, evidently fleeing from an entity or individual, ultimately lay unconscious just beyond his residence? Coincidence? A ruse? A snare? Or merely a fractured spirit in need of assistance? Julian settled into the armchair across the room, elbows resting on his knees, hands interlaced before his mouth. He was not a man easily unsettled, yet this evening, something had breached the defenses he had meticulously constructed over the years. He cast another glance at her. The elevation and descent of her chest was gradual and consistent, tranquil. She was secure in this moment. Yet who was she? And what turmoil had she just evaded? As the initial rays of dawn permeated the curtains, Julian remained seated, observing the woman who had silently upended his understanding of control, caution, and probability. He was unaware of her name, but he would soon learn it. Regardless of whether she introduced turmoil or solace, one fact was indisputable: their lives would irrevocably change. The aroma of fresh linen and lavender permeated the tranquil room as morning sunlight softly streamed through cream-colored curtains. Eva stirred beneath the plush duvet, her eyelids fluttering open. She gazed at the elaborate ceiling for an extended period, bewildered by its unfamiliar grandeur. The silence was palpable, disrupted solely by the gentle ticking of the antique wall clock. Attempting to rise, she winced at the discomfort in her body. A subtle knock interrupted her contemplation. Julian entered, impeccably attired in a slate gray suit devoid of a tie, his expression inscrutable yet composed. "You are awake," he remarked softly, setting a tray on the bedside table. "Water and a light snack." Eva offered a slight nod, her voice hoarse. "Thank you." He occupied the chair opposite her, his gaze unwavering. "Could you please disclose your name?" A pause ensued. "Are you simply Eva?" She exhibited reluctance. At present, he refrained from pressing the matter. "Do you recall the events that transpired?" Eva gradually shook her head. "Fragments and components. I recall operating a vehicle, a man shouting, followed by a sensation of cold." Julian observed her, although her glance revealed no fear, only fatigue. She appeared excessively fatigued to deceive, or perhaps too shattered to feign. "You were found unconscious and injured in the park adjacent to my property. I brought you here and arranged for a physician to examine you. You are secure. What motivates one to assist an unfamiliar individual?" His response was straightforward. Due to your necessity for assistance. She averted her gaze, tilting her head slightly. You are unaware of my potential threat. He stated that he is still observing. However, his tone lacked venom. It was merely candid. In the ensuing days, Eva resided in the guest suite, recuperating her vitality through rest and modest meals. She spoke infrequently, although consistently with politeness. The household workers rapidly developed an affection for her. Mrs. Glenn, the long-standing housekeeper, commenced presenting her with fresh flowers. Chef Mateo prepared her signature soups and instructed her on the technique of folding dumplings in the kitchen. Julian observed from a distance. She was neither demanding nor did she exhibit any indications of duplicity. No communications, no correspondence, no evidence of manipulation. She assisted with mundane household tasks, retrieved books from the library, and devoted hours to journaling in the solarium. Nevertheless, something felt off to him. On the fourth day, he discovered her in the garden with Mrs. Glenn, transplanting herbs. The spectacle caused him to halt. Her hair was loosely tied back, sleeves rolled to the elbows, dirt on her hands, and the sun warming her face. She appeared to fit in, although belonging did not eliminate inquiries. Subsequently that evening, Eva traversed past his study. He glanced away from his laptop, perceiving her in his peripheral vision. Upon her rotation, her hair moved, and at that moment, he observed it once more. That designation. He rose suddenly. Eva, she halted. Indeed, your neck. May I examine something? Perplexed, she turned slightly, sweeping her hair aside. There it was, a delicate tattoo inscribed just beneath the hairline. Subtle, yet recognizable. Julian's gaze intensified. Where did you acquire this? Eva instinctively touched her neck. I do not recall. Why? He approached a bookshelf, retrieved a binder, and opened it to a page extracted from a travel industry journal. Displayed on the page was a corporate logo, one Julian recognized all too well. It belonged to Harmony Trails, a purported humanitarian tourism initiative under Caldwell Global, Julian's most formidable competitor in the luxury travel sector. Ostensibly, it was promoted as a means to link affluent travelers with marginalized communities. Julian had discerned the facade years prior. His private inquiries had revealed exploitative practices concealed behind cheerful volunteers and staged photographs. Children were overworked, locals were unpaid, and narratives were sanitized for donors. He gazed at Eva. That symbol originates from one of their pilot projects in Southeast Asia. Eva's complexion turned ashen. I was unaware. She claimed she had no recollection. I don't, she replied, her voice barely audible. But perhaps I volunteered. I cannot ascertain why it exists. I merely know I detest it. Why? Her hands quivered. Because each time I encounter it, I experience shame. The impact of her words struck him more profoundly than anticipated. Julian nodded gradually, the atmosphere laden with doubt. He yearned to place his trust in her. He wished to believe she was not an operative, nor merely a pawn dispatched by Jason Caldwell to undermine his endeavors. Yet how could he? The insignia of his adversary was imprinted upon her skin. He remained silent for the remainder of the evening. Eva discreetly excused herself, withdrawing to her chamber, while Julian, isolated in his study, gazed at the emblem in the crease, then turned his attention to the vacant corridor. The query that troubled him evolved from merely inquiring about her identity to contemplating why his heart wanted to safeguard her, despite reason urging him to dismiss her. Julian could not ascertain the moment this sentiment commenced, whether it was when Eva began occupying his thoughts or when her serene presence in a space felt akin to gravitational pull. Perhaps it was her gentle demeanor and attentive presence, or her ability to listen as if each word held significance. Despite lacking memory, she invested herself in every minor task, assisting the gardener with rose pruning, sharing laughter with the chef in the kitchen, and clumsily, yet joyfully mastering the art of dough folding. The staff held her in great affection. Julian observed from afar, increasingly captivated by her than he was willing to acknowledge. However, an unseen restraint impeded him. The tattoo, the affiliation with Caldwell Global, the inherent peril. He could not dispel the unease. He discreetly contacted former associates, ex-employees, community leaders, and humanitarian organizations. He reassured himself that it was not skepticism, but rather a means of safeguarding both himself and her. Eva remained oblivious. She persisted in living with subdued intention. During dinner, she recounted assisting a stranger in the market, her voice fading as if attempting to access an elusive memory. Julian remained silent. However, the manner in which she smiled through the obscurity began to erode his defenses. Nevertheless, uncertainty persisted until a rainy afternoon when circumstances shifted dramatically. Eva was in the greenhouse attending to herbs when she observed movement beyond the hedge. A man, camera in hand, unfamiliar and not part of the staff, caught her attention. She froze momentarily before fleeing, not towards the house, but directly into the woods. An hour later, Mrs. Glenn contacted Julian in a state of panic. Eva was missing. He acted impulsively, sprinting forward as the tempest engulfed the heavens. He repeatedly called her name, drenched and with a racing heart. At the lake's perimeter, he spotted her on a bench, diminutive and trembling. "I should have known," she remarked without meeting his gaze. "You were observing me. Perhaps not you, but an envoy you dispatched." Julian remained silent. "I had to be certain," he finally articulated. She emitted a sardonic laugh. "Certain of what? That I am perilous? That I am deceitful?" He remained unresponsive. "I trusted you," she murmured. "But individuals like me are not saved. We are exploited repeatedly." Julian advanced nearer. "Eva," he began, but she interjected, her voice trembling. "No, I am uncertain of my identity, although for a time, your benevolence appeared genuine. I allowed myself to believe I was worthy of it, yet I am not, and I cannot serve as your uncertainty." She pivoted, tears blending with the rain. "I wish to avoid causing you pain, but I refuse to endure suffering once more." Julian observed her departure, his heart vacant, and for the first time, he contemplated, was he apprehensive of peril, or was he fearful of succumbing to love? The fresh air was invigorating, yet Julian's thoughts were decidedly muddled. His contact in Singapore had just transmitted the final component of a conundrum he regretted initiating. Eva Raines, erstwhile executive assistant and media liaison for Jason Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Global Travel, Julian's most astute competitor in the premium hospitality sector. Her participation in numerous press releases had escaped media attention, perceived just as an element of the public relations apparatus. However, to those who recognized the indicators, her role had been considerably more substantial. She represented the human aspect of Harmony Trails, the ethical volunteer tourism initiative that Julian had long suspected to be a facade for exploitation. Eva had joined Jason on site visits, featured in promotional videos, and authored blog articles imbued with meticulously crafted optimism until her abrupt disappearance. Julian gazed at the image on his screen, a photograph of Eva, smiling yet fatigued, positioned alongside Jason during a groundbreaking ceremony in Cambodia. Even then, her eyes conveyed a narrative that no headline had encapsulated. He reclined in his chair, inhaling deeply. It now possessed a disconcerting coherence. The trepidation in her voice, the aversion to hospitals, the tattoo, and her occasional paralysis in response to abrupt noises. She had infiltrated Jason's empire and then fled. A rap on the door jolted him from his reverie. Mrs. Glenn glanced in. "She is in the garden, sir." Julian ambled down gradually. Eva positioned herself beside the roses, delicately caressing a newly formed bloom. She gazed at him and smiled, but her expression swiftly diminished upon observing his countenance. "You have discovered something," she remarked softly. He acquiesced. "I have identified your identity now." Eva averted her gaze. "You likely understand why I endeavored to forget." His tone conveyed no hostility, only anguish. "Why did you not inform me?" "I refrained from doing so, because I no longer wished to be that girl, the one who smiled alongside a monster who assisted him in peddling falsehoods." Julian awaited a response. Eva exhaled unsteadily. "Initially, I held faith in it. Jason stated that we were constructing something superior. I desired to believe that fervently. However, I subsequently began to perceive phenomena. The children who operated behind the camera. The funds that failed to arrive at the villages. The local officials abruptly acquired new vehicles. Upon posing inquiries, he remarked that I was naive. When I exerted further pressure, he became malevolent. Her voice diminished. "He never struck me, although it was unnecessary. Words can also confine you. Julian tightened his fists. She nodded in the USB. I duplicated files, emails, contracts, and payment records. I intended to provide them to a journalist, but someone alerted him. I sprinted. A silence extended between them. Your departure shone courage. You were undeserving of any of the events that transpired. She stated that she lacks courage. I am simply fatigued. Julian gazed at her for an extended duration. You are no longer solitary. However, destiny was unkind. That afternoon, the tempest erupted. Jason Caldwell made an appearance on national media, positioned in a meticulously illuminated office, composed and deliberate. With a calculated smirk, he responded to the speculation regarding a former employee's disappearance and the alleged data theft. Regrettably, Jason stated with composure, Mrs. Ava Raines is a distressed young woman. She vanished months ago with confidential company information, and now she has reemerged, conveniently residing with my business adversary, Mr. Julian West. He paused, allowing the implication to resonate. Do not be mistaken, he added. This is not a coincidence. This is corporate sabotage. The headlines erupted within minutes. Caldwell alleges that his competitor is concealing a business espionage agent. Who is Eva Raines? Protagonist or cybercriminal? Julian West's enigmatic female associate connected to controversy. Julian's phone incessantly rang. Public relations agents, shareholders, attorneys, and board members requested clarifications. Crisis mode engaged. Eva observed the event transpire from the periphery of the room, feeling insensate and ashen. I sincerely apologize, she murmured. I did not intend to involve you in this. Julian approached and softly grasped her hand. You did not involve me in anything, he stated, his tone calm and unwavering. Indeed, they did. She gazed at him, her eyes wide with incredulity. Jason does not intimidate me, Julian persisted. I have interacted with him in boardrooms for years, but this time, it transcends business. It is personal. Eva's voice faltered. They will dismantle you for safeguarding me. Julian tightened his grip on her hand. Let them attempt. In that moment, for the first time since her flight, Eva no longer felt as though she were running. The headlines were unrelenting. From public relations professional to public relations controversy, who is Eva Raines? Caldwell's former partner and West's current romantic interest. Serendipity or corporate collusion? The woman situated between two empires? Online forums analyzed her life. All archival photographs and every blog entry she has composed for Harmony Trails. Her visage was prominently shown on news tickers and scrutinized by talk show hosts. One portrayal depicted her as a shrewd manipulator, while the other presented her as a tragic beauty enshrouded in controversy. In every photograph that emerged, she resembled more of a symbol than an individual. Eva ceased reading them following the third day. However, even if she closed the displays, she could not eliminate the whispers or the footsteps when she attempted to purchase food. The conversations ceased abruptly upon her entrance into the room. The voicemails from individuals she had previously considered friends, some conveying disbelief, while others expressed disgust. A duplicitous social climber likely orchestrated it from the first. The anguish was most acute when it originated from individuals she had previously trusted, although nothing pierced quite like hearing the words from Julian's board. We acknowledge that your personal life is your own, stated one executive, his tone strained with artificial politeness. However, Julian, the brand must maintain its integrity. Your association with Ms. Raines is jeopardizing the company's public image, another individual remarked. Investors are apprehensive. Our Southeast Asia expansion agreement has already encountered delays. The CFO stated unequivocally that a decision was required. Either publicly dissociate from the woman or appoint interim leadership. Julian remained silent, stood up, fastened his jacket, and exited without further comment. That evening, Eva discovered him alone on the terrace, gazing at the city skyline. His hands were positioned on the railing, jaw taut. You should permit me to leave, she spoke softly behind him. Julian refrained from turning. I never intended to be a burden to you. Now he turned. His countenance was inscrutable. You're not a burden. I'm turmoil. Eva remarked, people despise me. They despise that I fled. They resent my survival. They believe I am exploiting you. I am uncertain of my actions, Julian approached. Allow me to remind you. His tone was composed, yet his gaze was intense. You have rekindled my motivation for initiating this endeavor. My rationale for constructing hotels adjacent to local towns rather than atop them. I declined bribes, facile arrangements, and Caldwell's commercial practices. He grasped her hands delicately. You reminded me of the significance of compassion and the importance of making ethical choices, especially in challenging circumstances. You reminded me that I am more than an inscription on a building. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Julian. He caressed her face with his thumb. I do not require your protection. However, I need you to guide me in living with intention. 1 week later, at the International Humanitarian Gala in Geneva, the world observed as cameras clicked, flashes illuminated, and murmurs circulated when Julian West entered the grand hall with his arm around Eva Raines. She donned a midnight blue gown, both understated and sophisticated. Her demeanor was composed, although her fingers quivered in his grasp. They occupied the front seats. The anticipated moment arrived as Julian approached the podium to provide the keynote address. He surveyed the luminous assembly of executives, diplomats, and journalists, and stated, with clarity, that my attendance this evening may adversely affect the reputation of this institution due to the woman I choose to accompany me. A whisper ensued. He hesitated, then proceeded. Eva Raines was previously affiliated with a firm that undermined the principles this room purports to uphold. However, upon uncovering the truth, she chose not to remain silent. She did not avert her gaze. She departed from luxury, security, and the career she established, and she accomplished this alone. He gazed at her. Her eyes were lustrous. Subsequently, I, an individual who dedicated my life to constructing an empire based on principles, discovered myself too apprehensive to stand alongside her. The room became silent. Not any longer, he asserted, his voice resolute. She requires no protection from me. However, I require her clarity and courage. I need her to remind me that acting rightly may not always be safe, yet it is invariably worthwhile. A pause. Indeed, Julian remarked, elevating his chin. I take pride in being here with her, and if that disturbs anyone's brand, then your values were never authentic. The room was silent for a minute. Subsequently, the applause ensued. Initially gradual, then intensifying until it surged like a tsunami. Julian resigned and rejoined Eva. She rose as he neared, and he embraced her, their foreheads meeting in the midst of that glaring room filled with scrutiny. At that moment, neither party experienced judgment. They experienced liberation. The file size was merely 74 megabytes. It could have been stored on any flash drive, uploaded in moments, and disseminated to numerous journalists with whom Eva had previously collaborated. Nevertheless, its burden seemed significantly greater than its digital presence. The contents, including emails, payment trails, fake charity reports, and corporate memoranda regarding falsified volunteer programs, were more than just data. It was a testament to all that she had previously supported. And now it would become the entity she would oppose. Julian occupied a seat next to her in his study as she executed the final encrypted transmission to the global press and legal oversight organization. She remained composed. However, her fingers lingered over the send button until he softly placed his palm on hers. You are not alone, he stated gently. She transmitted the message. Within hours, the media frenzy resumed, but this time the focus was appropriately directed. A whistleblower has disclosed incriminating information on Caldwell Global, with a former insider revealing the exploitation inside the volunteer tourism industry. Jason Caldwell is currently under formal investigation by the International Labor Rights Commission. Jason Caldwell's self-satisfied smile disappeared from the broadcast. He was called for interrogation. Investors divested. His public relations staff released the customary insipid remarks regarding compliance evaluations and unexpected mishaps, but the harm was already inflicted. Ava's name was no longer uttered in scandalous tones. It was proclaimed as a reckoning. However, the truth, akin to fire, did not solely consume its intended victims. Collateral arrived promptly. Shortly thereafter, Julian was informed that 3 of his Asian investment partners were withdrawing from their joint ventures. Not in a public manner, certainly. They referenced logistical considerations and market factors. However, he was aware of the reality. Excessively proximate to controversy, excessively perilous, excessively associated with a woman who had previously been entrenched within the system. Brand allegiance fluctuated, shareholders expressed discontent. Julian's counsel attempted to manipulate perceptions, emphasizing Western markets and rebranding as a more socially responsible choice. However, he recognized that this would be insufficient, prompting him to make the decision alone. He resigned as CEO, transferred leadership to his longtime COO, released a concise and dignified statement indicating his intention to concentrate on local initiatives and community-based tourism, and thereafter departed the city with Eva. They withdrew to a serene location in the mountains, where the air was infused with the scent of pine and mist, and the sole nocturnal sound was the wind whispering through the trees. It was the location where Julian constructed his inaugural property, a modest eco-lodge, prior to his ascent to global prominence. It had remained unoccupied for years. It has now transformed into their sanctuary, their renewal. They resided modestly. Mornings commenced with coffee prepared on a gas stove. Afternoons were devoted to traversing woodland trails, while evenings frequently concluded with curling up beside the fire, either reading aloud or listening to the rain. After years, Julian experienced profound sleep, while Ava dreamt without trepidation. However, tranquility, even in its gentlest manifestation, never entirely alleviates the pain of what has been forfeited. One evening, the rain fell more intensely than usual, persistent and unyielding. The sky was marred by thunderclouds, and the mountain air became crisp. Ava stood on the porch, enveloped in an oversized sweater, seeing the tempest advance over the valley. Julian accompanied her, his footsteps subdued. For a period, they remained silent, accompanied just by the sound of rain. Subsequently, she directed her attention towards him. "If you could begin anew," she remarked, her voice scarcely audible over the wind. "If you could return to the moment prior to our encounter in that park, would you still intervene?" He gazed at her, his eyes unwavering. "Eva, I inquire not out of skepticism towards you," she stated. "I require confirmation. After all that transpired, the scandal, the board, your enterprise, everything we sacrificed, was it worthwhile?" Julian approached, tucking her wet hair behind her ear. "If I could relive it all," he stated deliberately, "I would still go for that same course." Her eyes glistened. "Even if the world did not select us," she murmured. He embraced her. "I choose you, Ava. Even if the world never does." She grasped his shirt, pressing her face against his chest as the rain intensified, yet it seemed as though the sky was purging something. Within that serene mountain resort, devoid of titles, scandals, and affluence, they existed not as symbols or sacrifices, but rather as two individuals who selected one another during the most challenging times. Thus, their love transcended mere fairy tale. It rendered it tangible. The antiquated lodge had evolved into more than merely a residence. Following their withdrawal from public attention, Julian and Eva reconstructed both the physical space and its intended function. What originated as the foundation of a luxury empire evolved into the core of something more significant. They developed a program for women who had endured adversity, widows, single mothers, and victims of abuse. Numerous individuals had previously toiled unnoticed behind the glossy facades of tourism. They were acquiring leadership skills. Julian instructed on fundamental business principles, guest stay management, hiking tour planning, and the establishment of ethical collaborations. However, it was Eva who imparted the program with its essence. She stood before every group, never claiming to be anything more than someone who had once been broken, too. With honesty, she shared her journey, from standing beside powerful men to running from their shadows. "I thought losing everything would break me," she once said, "but it only stripped away what was never real." Her words sparked something deep in the women. And beyond the lodge, her memoir, The Quiet Exit, found a publisher and a voice. What moved Eva most weren't the sales, but the letters from women in shelters, from young girls hiding truths, from people who simply wrote, "You made me feel seen." Julian watched her flourish, stronger, freer, more radiant than ever. And as he watched, he realized he didn't just love her, he deeply admired her. So on the morning of their program's official launch, with pine trees overhead and a handmade banner swaying in the breeze, Julian stepped forward. A small crowd of locals and guests clapped as he took the mic. "This lodge was where I once learned how to build a business," he said. "But today we begin building something greater. Community." He paused. His eyes found Eva. "And before we begin, I want to ask someone very important to join me up here." Eva blinked, surprised as he held out his hand. She stepped forward, unsure, her heart already racing. Julian looked at the audience, then back at her. "The day I met Eva, she looked like someone who didn't want to be found. But I found myself the moment I found her." He pulled a small box from his pocket. As he opened it, sunlight broke through the clouds. "I don't want a brand or a legacy," he said softly. "I just want to be the man who walks beside you through whatever life brings." He knelt. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. They embraced as the crowd erupted, not just for love, but for two people who chose to begin again. That night, beneath a sky full of stars, Eva rested her head on Julian's shoulder. "Did you plan all of it?" she inquired. He pressed his lips to her forehead. "I envisioned a markedly different existence," he whispered. "However, upon discovering you, I realized that nothing else was requisite." 1 year later, their world had become gentler. Situated amidst towering cliffs and a secluded expanse of coastline, a meticulously crafted wooden residence stood, caressed by the sea breeze and adorned with wildflowers. Initially a mere concept sketched in the recesses of Julian's notebook, it gradually materialized into reality. A sanctuary not solely for visitors, but for mending souls. They named it the Driftwood Home, a modest resort comprising 5 meticulously designed cabins, each providing tranquility rather than opulence. Eva and Julian resided in the main house, where the ocean's melody welcomed them each morning, and stars vigilantly observed their slumber at night. Eva's abdomen had assumed the soft contour characteristic of early motherhood. She radiated a unique luminosity, a blend of tranquility and expectation, frequently placing her hands tenderly over the life developing within her. Julian noted, "Now, I compose not business strategies, but pages of introspection and veracity." His manuscript, Sustainable by Heart, was nearing completion. The focus was not on profit margins or expansion strategies, but on revitalizing the essence of an industry that had neglected its intended beneficiaries. He articulated the plight of villages abandoned post-tourist seasons, the voiceless laborers, and, most significantly, the pivotal moment that transformed his life. Not at the moment he finalized his inaugural billion-dollar transaction, but rather when he encountered Eva on a rainy night, disoriented and shivering. Eva dedicated her mornings to the herb garden and her afternoons to responding to correspondence from readers of her memoir. She had initiated a modest podcast, Voices Between the Lines, in which she interviewed survivors of emotional and corporate abuse, assisting them in reframing their narratives. She never referred to herself as a healer. However, those who listened frequently remarked that her voice had a healing quality. Life had ceased to be hurried. It had become profound. On a rainy afternoon, as the tide commenced to rise, Eva sat nestled on the porch swing with a steaming cup of peppermint tea. Julian joined her, a blanket draped over both their laps. They remained silent for a time. The rain was soft, like a lullaby tapping on the wooden roof. Inside their cozy living room, the fireplace crackled. On the mantel sat their most cherished photo, a candid shot captured by a staff member of Julian, holding Eva under a storm in the garden the night she nearly walked away. The rain obscured their forms, yet their embrace was unmistakably tight. Eva observed this scene, a nostalgic smile playing on her lips. "I once believed," she articulated slowly, "that I was merely a traveler, a nomad without a destination, someone devoid of belonging." Julian responded, "I was a man constructing shelters for others while neglecting to create a sanctuary for my own heart." She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "It is amusing, is it not, how we both perceived ourselves as lost." Meanwhile, he whispered, we were approaching one another. The wind intensified marginally, and Julian rose. He extended his hand towards her. "Accompany me," he stated. She arched an eyebrow yet complied. They ambled leisurely along the stone pathway past the cabins to a newly constructed wooden archway that overlooked the sea. A hand-carved sign adorned the location of our stay, beneath which Julian had positioned a bench. The backrest bore the inscription, found in the rain, chosen in the calm. Eva, moved, touched the words. "It's for you," Julian remarked softly. "For us, for every moment we chose to remain, even when the world urged us to flee." She sat down, and he joined her. They observed the waves crashing, experiencing the gentle mist of salt upon their skin. Julian grasped her hand. "Regardless of what lies ahead, this child, this existence, is not singular. I am not departing." Eva rested her head on his shoulder. "Neither shall I." In that moment, devoid of ostentatious displays or proclamations, they possessed everything. The world need not comprehend their bond. They understood each other, and that was enough. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the waves, Julian kissed Eva's temple and whispered, "We didn't start like a fairy tale, but I'd take this ending over any crown or castle." Eva looked up at him and smiled. "Because it's real," she said. "Because we built it together, and together they stayed softly, fiercely, completely. At last, they were home." If this story stirred something in your heart, made you believe again in love that heals, in second chances, and in the quiet power of choosing each other, then this is exactly the kind of story we love to tell. Julian and Eva did not commence their journey with perfection. They began with suffering, distrust, and the remnants of an unchosen past. The beauty of their narrative lay not in its ease, but in its authenticity. If you believe in a love that flourishes amidst adversity and the bravery required to remain when all indications suggest departure, we invite you to join us as well. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for additional poignant narratives, tales of resilience, hope, and reminders that we are never entirely lost, merely en route to our true home. Remember to like, share, and activate notifications to ensure you never overlook a story that may resonate with your spirit. Until next time, remain compassionate, courageous, and steadfast in your belief in love.